Okay, I will get started up here where we're at. So this week, let me make sure I'm not muted this time. Okay, we're good, we're good. And I think I'm recording. I am. Yay, sometimes I remember to do things. So where we're at this week is we're going to talk about gender and sex. Another topic that a lot of times in our society, because there's a lot of differing views around it, a lot of us have a tendency to just not talk about it at all. Which doesn't, that kind of does a disservice because ignoring things doesn't make it easier. But we'll get into Kotak chapter 9, as well as the additional article by Martin. You may have heard the idea of nature versus nurture before. It's basically the debate on, are our personalities hardwired biologically, or is it tied more to who raises us? And realistically, there's a little bit of both. There's a little bit of both going on. The differences between sex and gender. Sex is the male, female, or intersex division of a species, especially as differentiated with reference to the reproductive functions. So sex is usually our biology, male or female or intersex. If you've never heard the term intersex before, I define it today. It's the old school term used to be hermaphrodite. We've gotten away from that term when talking about humans. So the accepted term is intersex, but just in case you've never heard that. Gender is the cultural conception, the idea of whether one is female, male, or something else. Now, saying or something else, I realize that might sound a little dismissive of like, something else. But really, what it is an attempt to be inclusive. As we'll kind of get into today, there are a lot of different options out there for gender, and to try and list them all around the globe would be really detailed. So instead, it's meant to be inclusive. When we look at species, either humans, other primates, or other animals, we usually look for whether or not they have sexual dimorphism, which is when males and females have differences in size, shape, appearance, and even temperament. For humans, we have pretty low sexual dimorphism. You might be sitting there thinking, well, I have differences from other sexes, and we do. We definitely have differences. But when it comes to size and temperament, what we'll get into today is biologically, we don't have too many differences. We're pretty low with sexual dimorphism as a species. Ernestine Friedel said, the quote up there, "The biological nature of men and women should be seen not as a narrow enclosure limiting the human organism, but rather as a broad base upon which a variety of structures can be built." Basically saying when we explore gender, we should think of it not as a limiting category of either one or the other and nothing else, but rather to think of it as building blocks. Start with the biological sex of male, female, or intersex, and then build on that. Look at different cultures and see how many genders do they have? What is their understanding of how this gender acts versus a different gender? And I'll get into today a historical example of how it can be very different than our American expectations. A great example of low sexual dimorphism is one of my favorite primates. These are gibbons. They are considered one of the lesser apes rather than the great apes. They are truly monogamous, meaning they mate for life. We'll get into when I talk about marriage and kinship. We'll get into how a lot of us here in our culture call ourselves monogamous. Realistically, what we are serial monogamists. Myself, I'll use myself as an example. I'm a monogamist. I always joke, I don't share. But I'm a monogamist. But where I'm not a true monogamist means the first person you ever date is the only person you will ever be with. And for some people, that sounds lovely and romantic and sweet. And for some of us, we might be thinking of our first partner and going, oh no, no. So sometimes it can sound nice. Sometimes you think of like me at 21, maybe making not as good decisions as I would make now. So we are serial monogamous, a lot of us, meaning we only have one partner at a time, but when we're done with that partner, if we either break up or if they unfortunately pass away or something, we will eventually move on to another partner, but only one at a time. And when we get into marriage, we'll talk about how there's way more options than that. Yeah.
And if one of them pass before the other.
Most of them just stay solitary. They just kind of mate for life, and when they're gone, they're gone. Sometimes there are instances where they will take up with another mate, but especially if they're like older in life, they're like, no, I had my love, I'm done. Which some humans do that. They marry young, and when one of the partners passes away, the other is like, that's it, I'm done. That's very monogamous. But you can see the males and females have slightly different colorations, but they're around the same size and their temperaments are the same. So there's not like differences in aggression levels or intelligence levels or anything like that. High sexual dimorphism, we see that a lot in birds. Peafowl is a great example. Peacocks are the boys, peahens are the ladies, just like with chickens. Where it's interesting is in our culture, for humans, we usually think that ladies tend to be more flashy and more, focused on beauty, things like that, which it depends, but we have a tendency to think that. And in a lot of bird species, it's the opposite. The ladies are much more drab in color to camouflage them because they're the ones that have to sit on the nest. Versus the males are showy, and that is because they use those feathers for protection and to attract a mate. She's gonna go for the guy with the biggest, prettiest feathers. So where I said I'll bring up an historic example is sex and temperament in three primitive societies, which, like I've mentioned, we don't really use the term primitive anymore, but this is originally published in 1935, where we definitely were still using that word. So that is the title. It was published first in 1935 and then revised a little in 1950 by good old Margaret Mead. She went to Papua New Guinea, which is an island that has a really diverse collection of societies, pretty small scale societies. So they're pretty small in number, but there's a lot of variety of culture there. Did you have a question?
I wanted to. Report on that.
Yeah,
And so that's okay, looking at it.
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Now, this is from 1935, so I don't know that this is exactly accurate today. And bear in mind that the comparison was with American social norms in 1935. And American gendered specific norms said that men were diplomatic and aggressive and the breadwinner, and women were catty and gossipy and paid more attention to beauty and things like that. Now, realistically, have I met men and women in 2026 that fit in those categories? Yeah, but not everyone. But this is the expectation in 1935. So Mead published a study that looked at three small tribes, the Arapesh, the Mundogumor, and the Chambuli. With the Arapesh, both men and women acted how they would expect women to act. Meaning they were mild-mannered, they were very parental, and they were very responsive. But in this instance, it was men and women or any gender that acted like this. It was basically just all adults in this tribe were pretty calm, pretty subdued, very parental, and very responsive. Versus the Mundogumor, it was the flip. It was what we were expecting men to act like in 1935. Both men and women in the Mundogumor people acted fiercely and aggressively. So they were more likely to react with maybe aggression or be very diplomatic, very strong-willed. And that, according to Mead and other anthropologists, was how we were expecting women to act. So we had these two first tribes where all genders acted like feminine qualities. And then the other one where all genders acted like masculine qualities. And then to completely upend our expectations, the Chambuli were the pretty much reverse of our gender norms. So here, men were catty, gossipy. They did their hair in the morning. They did the shopping. Versus women were managerial and energetic and didn't pay as much attention to personal adornment, like makeup or jewelry or doing their hair. All of that was to say that maybe our expectations around how genders act may not be rooted in biology. It's probably rooted in our history and our culture. We talked about how culture is learned. We learn how to be a proper little lady or a little man. Right now in our society, we're starting to have the conversation around more gender options, but we're still pretty split between men and women. I think of I think of me as a kid, I was a very hyper child. My mother wanted me to wear cute little dresses all the time. But if you wore cute little dresses, I was also constantly getting scolded to sit like a lady. Nowadays, as an adult, I love dresses because I've discovered leggings and bike shorts. And now, if I accidentally, I'm not going to flash anybody. I'm like, I can sit however I want, and I'm fine. But that didn't really exist as much, or at least I didn't have access to it when I was a kid. And I was constantly told to be a lady, sit like a lady. So we have gender roles, which are basically the tasks and activities that a culture assigns to each sex. So even today, while we have gotten much more advanced and much more equal, we still have gendered expectations where we look at the language we use. When a mom also has a job, we call her a working mom. Versus, I would argue, a mom who doesn't have a career is still probably working her butt off. I don't have kids. There's a reason for that. My best friend has four, and I tease her that I'm like, thank you, you had enough for me. Good job, because I'm not doing it. I love her kids so much. They're my nieces and nephews, love them with all my heart.
You love them better than you give back.
Exactly. I love that I can be like, oh my God, one of them threw up. Okay, where's your mom? No, I will try to help when I'm there. But I like that I can then go, okay, I'm gonna go home to my cat. I love you guys so much. Mwah. See you later. It's it's a trade-off. I get to be the fun auntie. But we do that where we ask people what they do for a living. And if you are a stay-at-home mom, a lot of people still think of that as less than, like you're not pulling your weight. Versus I think of my parents growing up. My dad was the breadwinner, partially because my mom had some physical limitations, so she couldn't be like a cashier standing all day. So she would do odd jobs and art and things like that. But she ran that house, man. She did all the cleaning, she did all the laundry, she did all the cooking, the grocery shopping. She drove the car because they shared one. Like, it drove me bonkers as a little kid when somebody would say very dismissively of, oh, your mom's just a stay-at-home mom. And I'm like, oh, what do you mean just? Like, this house would fall apart without her. So gender roles depend on environment, economy, and a lot of things tie in, including even political systems, which we'll get into today. We do still have gender stereotypes, which are oversimplified ideas around how people should act based on their gender. We also, unfortunately, have gender stratification, which is unequal access to resources. In the US, it's okay. I can't help but laugh at the irony that International Women's Day was also the day we lost an hour. And I'm like, oh, give me my hour back. It's my day. It's kind of like Black History Month being the shortest month. I'm like, what, why? But if you think of the gender pay gap, we have laws in place that are supposed to limit discrimination based on race, gender, religion, things like that. But there's always back doors to discriminate. And one way we can see that is paying women less than their male counterparts. Now, that doesn't mean guarantee every woman you meet is going to be paid less, but overall, we women have a tendency to be paid less. And it brings in not just gender, but race. White women are paid about 79 cents, 77 cents per dollar that a white man makes, but women of color make even less. So they all tie in together, unfortunately. I'm going to take a moment to complain, but also talk about gender reveal parties. Now, this is a newer concept. And there's I have nothing against them on paper because while I don't have kids, I understand that if you're gonna have a kid, you wanna celebrate them, you wanna have a party, that I totally get. And it's an additional party rather than just a baby shower. It's a day to basically say, we know if we're having a boy or a girl. The problem is, what you're really saying is, we know the baby's sex, we don't know the baby's gender yet. Because the baby has to get here and figure it out and tell us. Sex, we know. Now, that being said, if I got invited to a sex reveal party, I would be very confused what I got invited to. So I understand why we use the language gender, because sex has two meanings. But it can push gendered stereotypes onto children. You have this cake, guns or glitter, basically saying that boys are inherently going to go for violence and girls are not. Versus, I've met quite a few pacifist men and quite a few aggressive, I'll say, women. I wouldn't say violent, but I've met a few that I'm like, yeah. So it's not a guarantee. A few other issues with them is they have started wildfires more than once. Americans love to do things bigger and better than our neighbor. So we keep going for like explosions for a gender reveal party. The one that broke my heart is trying to remember if it was in California or Utah, but I might be wrong. A family wanted to do an explosion of colored smoke for their gender reveal party, but wanted to save some money, so they made it themselves. And what they basically made was a pipe bomb. One of the mother-in-laws died. She died from shrapnel. A woman died at a gender reveal party. If you're supposed to be there celebrating a new life, let's not make pipe bombs. Like, please don't. Let's not make pipe bombs, I think is a good rule of thumb. So it's also started wildfires. People have died. The other thing I'm seeing is, I believe it's called gendered disappointment, where you will have a young couple and they do the pre-gender reveal party thing where they go through the party and like, ooh, I'm your dad and I think you're gonna be a boy or something like that. And so the dad is pulling for a son, which I understand a lot of men want to have a little boy. That, that I understand. I understand having like a preference of like what you would get better with or what you would vibe better with. But what bums me out is it'll be a filmed gender reveal party that goes on the internet and you see a puff of pink smoke, and instead of a moment of, oh well, yay, baby, the dad gets like angry. That breaks my heart because I'm like, that little girl's gonna grow up and be like, where's my gender reveal party? Wow, dad was really pissed about me, real pissed, and I wasn't even here yet. That breaks my heart. I'm like, that's gotta be a bummer to little kids. You know, we don't want them to be like, oh, I was so mad about you.
Gotta build them up, get them tough while they're young. They'll never see it. I wasn't actually mad, just, you know, I'm just gonna say.
It wasn't like, kid out. You're part of the problem now.
I love my daughter, she's just too much like my wife, and they're gonna clash, they already clashed, she's only 3, so I can only imagine.
I was gonna say, I'm one of 2 daughters and I am way too much like my father. So he has even joked that he's like, I didn't get a son, but I did get a carbon copy. I'm like, yes, you did. Yes, you did. So when we see decreased gender stratification, meaning men and women make equal contributions to subsistence. So I would argue that doesn't mean men and women making money the same, but like I said, with stay-at-home moms, they're still pulling their weight. They're probably, in some instances, doing more work, yep. Especially because for a stay-at-home mom, there's no off time. There's no, oh, clock out, okay, I'm no more mom for the rest of the night. It's a 24/7 gig. When we see this, we also see a decrease in the domestic and public spheres being so sharply separated. We have a tendency to value work outside of the home more than work inside the home. Think even with arts and crafts. Art styles that are dominated by women have a tendency to be diminished as just crafts. Things like needlepoint, embroidery, lace work, all of that. That is stuff that I can't do. Oh my gosh, I know somebody that embroiders and I'm impressed. One, I just don't think I have the patience for it, but it's a skill. But we'll have a tendency to look down on it and say like, oh yeah, it's just arts and crafts. And you're like, yeah, but that was some actual skill. The book brings up the domestic public dichotomy, which is when work at home is more valued than work outside the home. Childcare and child rearing is what historically has kept women close to the home. So if we're living as foragers, hunters and gatherers, the reason why men end up as the hunters and women as the gatherers is one, hunting is usually a little more dangerous. Not that you can't die while foraging, you could like roll down a hill or something, but hunting is usually a little more dangerous. And two, biologically, women are the ones that are feeding the children. We're mammals, meaning we have mammary glands and breastfeed. So if you are literally the producer of their food, you're gonna keep that person nearby. And so it makes more sense for them to do more of the child rearing because they have to be there anyways. I would read a paper about like the invention of the breast pump and how liberating that must have been for a lot of women. I'm like, I had to have been like, oh my gosh, I don't have to be tethered. So I mentioned how sometimes gender equality and gender roles can be tied to political systems. You've probably heard the term patriarchy, which I will get into in a moment. But to explain to you, the other option is a matriarchy. I have it defined on the next slide, but a matriarchy is basically where women are more revered and usually hold higher positions of power. It doesn't necessarily mean women are in charge and men are never in charge. It just means there's usually a little more equality and women are respected a bit more. In a matriarchy, you usually have matrilineal descent, meaning you trace your ancestry and your lineage through your mother's line. In our culture, we're usually unilineal, meaning, I think that's the term, where we do both ties, our fathers and mothers, or both parents. But you can see how we have patrilineal leftovers because it is still very, very common when a heterosexual couple gets married that the woman takes his last name. So like my last name, I love my last name. If I get married someday, I think I would hyphenate because I don't want to lose my last name. It's been mine for a long time. But then sometimes I bum myself out because I think, well, yeah, it's my last name, and it's my mom's last name now, but her last name was Voss. And her mom's last name was Van Portfleet. And I realized like how many last names have been lost over the generations because of who we're deciding to whose name to pick. We also tend to see matrilocal, meaning they live with the mother's family. So in a lot of matriarchies, children will live with their mothers and families. The house will sort of belong to the mom, and inheritance gets passed from mother to daughter. Now, what's fascinating is in political matriarchies, we have a tendency to see infrequent warfare and less population pressure, meaning there's less pressure on women to have as many babies as possible. There's nothing wrong if you personally want to have as many babies as possible. I personally would say, ouch. But I joke, my niece, I got to be in the room when she was born, and my joke is, as beautiful as that was, that is as close as I will ever get. That was close enough for me. I was there to cheer on my bestie, and she was a trooper. She did great, but I was the like, you're doing so great. You're doing so great. Oh my God, you're doing great. And I'm like, oh. And then she did it 4 times and I'm like, oh, I'm impressed by her. I'm, no, God, no. Did you? Was that tough for you?
No. I just pulled it out, she did all the work.
Exactly. You're like.
I just got the folder for this. She
Mhm.
was pretty upset with that. I handed it right to her, so she could.
That's good, that's good. In the animal kingdom, an example of a matriarchy are bonobos. They used to be called pygmy chimpanzees because we used to think they were a subspecies of chimpanzees, but we now understand they're their own species. They are our closest living relative. We share like 99% of our DNA with them. Chimpanzees are patriarchal, meaning males are usually in charge. Chimpanzee troops are pretty frequent with the warfare. They will fight either in the group or between two different groups. With bonobos, there is fighting. I'm not saying it never happens, but this is where we can laugh for a moment. You can decide on your own whether this is what makes them human or not. The two ways that they will go to solve a disagreement before violence is food or sex. And in fact, if one has a delicious snack and the other wants it, they will frequently try to distract them with sex to get the food. I will let you decide whether or not that seems more human or less. Especially the food route, I'll be safe and go the food route. Sometimes I'm watching like Congress or the Senate and they're yelling at each other. And I have that moment of like, are they hungry? If we brought in some sandwiches, would they settle down a little bit? Like if we all just shared some food, would we chill out? Maybe. I don't want them to solve Senate issues with sex. I'm not tuning in for that. The food, yes, the food I'd be okay with. Now, when we look at human matriarchies, it's not as simple as just having a female leader. So a matriarchy is a society in which women hold a higher status than men and play a more prominent role in politics. So realistically, in a matriarchy, you probably will have a woman in charge, but having a woman in charge doesn't automatically make you a matriarchy. We, in our society, are pretty strictly a patriarchy. If in the last presidential election, if we had elected Harris, that wasn't going to magically make us a matriarchy overnight. There would be a lot of changes that would have to happen for that to be true. So just because a woman's in charge doesn't make it a matriarchy, but you're on the steps if that's your goal. Pictured is former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. I brought her up because she's a modern politician that was in charge of a country. She's no longer the Prime Minister. Where I will give her credit, I wasn't like super focused on her career or anything, but where I was kind of jealous of her leadership was during COVID. She like locked New Zealand down and they were basically living COVID free while the rest of us were struggling. Now, to be realistic, New Zealand is an island and a lot smaller than the US, so I understand it's easier to lock down a small island versus a large continent. That's a lot harder. But I was a little jealous because in like 2021, we were getting ready for another shutdown. And then I was seeing TikToks in New Zealand of people at concerts. And I'm like, oh, you guys are just done with COVID? Must be nice. I'm like, we can't get people to wear masks, but okay. An example of a true matriarchy are the Minangkabau of West Sumatra in Indonesia. So again, a matriarchy is where women are revered. In this society, land inheritance is passed from mother to daughter. They are matrilocal and matrilineal. We can see a lot of this in the traditions around marriages. So in a lot of smaller scale societies that are patriarchal, when a heterosexual couple is going to get married, it's usually the groom and his wedding party will go to her house and get her for the wedding. In here, it's the reverse. She and her party goes to his house, which is technically his mom's house, and picks him up and brings him to the wedding. So it's a little reversed. In the event of a divorce, which interestingly enough, divorce in a matriarchy is easier than in a patriarchy. It doesn't mean it's as easy as just waking up and saying, I'm done and moving out. But in this instance, it kind of is. Their divorce is pretty simple. If the couple decides, hey, this isn't working, she doesn't really kick him out. He just takes his stuff and goes back to live with his mom. And it's not in a like, haha, you live with your mom again way. They're matrilocal. That's where he lives unless he's married. He just lives with his mom. So he would just move back in with his mom and try again later. And for her inheritance is that's her house. She inherited it from her mom. So it's her house. She gets to keep it. Now I'm going to bring up a patriarchy. It's a party in the USA. It's not a party. It just makes me laugh because I was a little older than the like Hannah Montana crowd. So it was just fascinating to me to see Miley Cyrus as Hannah Montana, this like wholesome all-American, and then to watch her do a complete 180. I was like, whoa, okay.
I think she's starting to get back into kids stuff.
She kind of is like coming back around. I'm like, okay, all right.
She started her videos with her Portuguese Miley again. I was like,
Okay.
that was
Yeah.
like, what?
Great. Welcome back. So a patriarchy is a little different in definition than a matriarchy. A matriarchy means women are usually in higher positions of power and are respected and revered. In a patriarchy, it is less about just, oh, men are more respected and more about men really being in control. Now, that is not to say that every single man who lives in a patriarchy is a domineering, aggressive man who wants to keep women down. But unfortunately, there's quite a few men like that that are in positions of power that do want that. So we can see that in the numbers. This is a couple of years old, but so men make up around 49% of the population, which is only looking at men and women, no other gender. But they make up 75% of the US Senate, you don't have to memorize these numbers, don't panic. 77% of the US House of Representatives, 71% of statewide elected executives, 78% of mayors in cities with populations over 30,000, 100% of presidents, and 98% of vice presidents. Well, we got one. Yay. It's the small victories. I'm like, hooray. So unfortunately, in a lot of patriarchies, it comes down to men wanting to hold their positions of power through domination and keeping other people down, including other men. So realistically, I just looked at gender for this. I should look up the numbers. Maybe I'll look that up tonight and tell you. If we looked at how many white men made up these numbers, it would also be the majority. So it is predominantly a group of white men, not every white man, but a group of white men that want to keep everybody else in check and beneath them. In patriarchies, we end up with the patrilineal patrilocal complex, meaning male supremacy is based on patrilineality, patrilocality, and warfare. So patrilineal means tracing our descent only through the men's line. And like I said, realistically, for a lot of us, we trace our ancestry from both sides of our family. But a lot of us are carrying our father's last name still. And again, I'm not trying to make it sound like, and we need to abolish that. No, I think there is something very nice, and it's a little poetic of me, but there is something very nice to be able to look at my last name and trace it back many, many generations. My last name, while I refer to myself as a white mutt, meaning you could just circle northwestern Europe and that's my ancestry, C card is French. And so I loved being able to trace that back up through Quebec, all the way into the south of France. That's been fun. In patriarchies, you will often find increased warfare, increased male superiority, and scarcer resources with more competition. Now, mentioning warfare, I'm always hesitant because I don't want you to think I'm just generalizing an entire gender. In no way is that saying, if we see increased warfare in a patriarchy, that must mean all men are biologically determined to be more violent. Not the case. Because that's why I bring up like the Margaret Mead study, where we have different societies where men are not the aggressors, and we have societies where women are the aggressors. But in a patriarchy, what it usually comes down to is power. And these small group of men that are in charge are very scared of no longer being in charge because historically they've gotten into those positions of power through violence and through aggression and domination, I should say. So usually what the fear is they say, well, I stepped on everybody to get up here to maybe, let's say, CEO. And they say, I treated everybody like crap to get here. So their fear is if I'm no longer highest top dog, then everybody else is going to treat me the way I treated everybody else. Whereas realistically, in a patriarchy, usually what the rest of the genders are saying is, no, it's not that we want to be in power. We just want more equality. So I don't want you to think I'm trying to say like, biologically men are just violent. Definitely not the case. But we see this violence in keeping people in control. Kotak explains, patriarchy describes a political system ruled by men in which women have inferior social and political status, including basic human rights. Frequently, violence is used to keep women, usually, in their place, so to speak. If you want to watch a video linked here about Malala Yousafzai, that's the woman on the screen if you've never seen her before. She's Pakistani. Now she is an educated woman who is an educator and a speaker and an author. The reason why she became internationally known is she was living under Taliban rule where little girls were not allowed to go to school. She was not only going to school, she was running a blog about fighting for her right for education. And her blog became not huge, but pretty well known. The Taliban viewed her as a threat, and one morning on her way to school, they came on her bus, shot her in the head, as well as a couple of other young girls. Thankfully, because she was internationally known, she got medical care that she may not have otherwise gotten because they were able to fly her, I want to say to the UK, I might have been here, but I want to say UK, to be seen by specialists. She bounced back. She's stronger than ever. And she basically used that notoriety to say, you can't keep me down, and kind of pursue a higher education and become a really well-known speaker and author about women's rights. So that is an extreme example of using violence to try and keep women down. The Taliban was saying the absolute worst thing a woman can do is get educated. So they viewed somebody, a young girl, telling other women to be educated as such a threat that they tried to kill her. Some other examples, and I'm going to get a little more detailed, but I'm going to try to be as gentle as possible. Some of these examples may be a bit jarring. Dowry murders, we see this happening occasionally in India, where a dowry is a substantial gift from the bride's family to the groom's family. And so after getting married, some men have been known to react with violence and even murder if the dowry is not substantial enough for their liking. And they will take it out on her, even though it was her family that saved it up. Like yeah. it's not happening so frequently that this is like a major cause of an issue, but it's enough of an issue that it's something tied to patriarchy. When I talk about marriage, I might bring up female infanticide, which is an extreme example when a patriarchal society places so much emphasis on having sons that daughters are killed. And we see that happening with like the one child rule that was in place in China. There were some instances of little girls being murdered, many more instances of little girls being abandoned at orphanages. The one that I will try to be gentle with is female genital mutilation, also sometimes called a clitoridectomy. And I think I have more info on the next slide, so bear with me. I do. Okay. So there's a few different names. Some call it female genital cutting, mutilation, clitoridectomy, or female circumcision. Now, we could get into the topic on male circumcision and whether or not we think that's appropriate. I personally, another reason why I'm grateful I don't have kids, I never have to make that decision on whether or not to circumcise a son. The closest I got is I got my cat neutered. That was it. That's the only decision I had to make. And that was an easy decision. That was an easy one. I was like, no, we don't need more kittens. There's plenty. I love cats, so there's enough. So this is a little more, or sometimes very more invasive. Where we see this practice going on is usually in the Arab world. Now, we see it more in Muslim countries, which that doesn't mean every Muslim country is Arab, but usually we see it more in that general area of the world. Again, because I want to be cautious, in no way am I saying every single Arab person, and man especially, is violent and aggressive. No way. That is definitely not what I'm saying. But that is the part of the world where we see this practiced. Within the Muslim faith and culture, there is a lot of emphasis placed on family honor. And usually what it gets tied to is female purity. The idea that women should stay chaste and virgins until they get married. Within some of these cultures, the idea is, in order to make sure women stay virgins, we need to make it physically painful or damn near impossible to even have penetrating sex. So they will do either a clitoridectomy, where they remove the clitoris. Sometimes they will close up the vaginal opening so that it is painful when she finally does have sex. And the idea is to make it so terrible that she doesn't want to participate. Now, that is as detailed as I'm going to get because I'm not here to make you uncomfortable, but I'm here to bring it up as it's unfortunate that we're still seeing this pervasive today. And realistically, if it was something like she's a grown woman who decides to do this on her own, then I say, fine, whatever, you're a consenting adult, do whatever makes you happy. But this is frequently done on little girls, like 11 and 12 years old. And it's very frequently done in a non-sterile environment, so infections can happen. Now, does it break my heart and I would love to go over there and make it stop altogether? Yeah, personally I would. But realistically, I know that's not going to happen. So if anything, what I can do is try and lobby for them to say, if you're going to practice this, let's do it in as safe a manner as possible. Let's do it in a way where we're explaining to the kids what's going to happen, so they're not just blindsided. Yeah, I'm gonna say, personally, I would like it to just stop. I would like it to be done, but it's something that isn't gonna stop overnight. I managed to get like the loudest water bottle ever. Sorry. Okay, we won't talk about that anymore. I know it's not a fun topic. Ooh, gray hair. I'm just losing gray hairs over here. I know. Oh, I laugh. You guys haven't seen my dad. My dad's hair is like, well, it's white. It's been white since he was like 20. But it's kind of wiry and curly, and those are my white hairs coming in. They like stick straight up, and I'm like, calm down. So looking at industrial societies like our own, we have economic roles of men and women, and they have changed over time. Industrialism, building of factories and things like that, led to a big change in who was doing what work. After 1900, so basically what happened, late 1800s, we started to see industrialization and a lot of factories being built. And they needed a lot of workers for these factories. The work, the work environment was kind of crappy, and not a lot of safety features, long hours, bad pay. So a lot of the men in these cities were like, I don't want that job. But the women were looking at it as, well, it's better than nothing, and I can at least get a little financial freedom to help me better my life. And so they took a lot of these jobs. This threatened a lot of the men in power because they now were seeing these women making their own money, going out of the house unchaperoned to go work in a factory. And so we started to see this push that we still hear today of a woman's place is in the house. It was basically trying to tell women that working outside of the home was going to masculate them, make them masculine and unlovable, and they'd never find a man that way. And some of the women were like, oh no, that was my whole goal. And a lot of them were like, that's not why I'm here. This was also the time of women's suffrage in Britain and the US, where women were fighting for the right to vote. So we had first wave feminism going on. Now, I mentioned that a lot of these factory working conditions were awful. Even today, factory working conditions can be pretty hard. There's a reason why it's blue collar labor. You're doing a lot of physical labor as well. This example of this type of factory, if you want to look up more about it, it's the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. In New York City, there was a factory that was a few levels high, like 6 or 8, and they made shirtwaists, which was a garment of the time. We don't really have a modern equivalent. And it was mostly women like this in big rows, and they either didn't have a fire extinguisher or the only fire extinguisher they had, which you can kind of see there, is like a bucket of water, which was the advanced technology they had, and it was better than nothing. Unfortunately, these shirtwaists were very flammable and a fire broke out. Now, not only did they not have good labeled fire escapes, they didn't have enough fire escapes, and because of union busting, they locked the women in. So a fire broke out and a whole bunch of these women died. It was a huge, horrible event. But I bring it up not to be like, that was terrible, and then move on, but to bring up that unfortunately, most of our safety standards, like clearly marked fire exits, emergency exits, things like that, not being allowed to lock your workers in the building, that is all because of workers like these women that gave their literal lives for us to learn this lesson. So it was a very dangerous job. When we look at gender and work, there are jobs dominated by men and fields dominated by women. What's interesting and frustrating is when you have a female dominated career and men start to join it. Look at nursing. Nursing used to be predominantly women, and still today, I think the vast number of nurses are female, but we have a lot more males as nurses. When this started to become more common, at first, we kind of ridiculed them. If you're old like me, you will know for a brief time, a male nurse was so new that we coined the term MRS. It didn't take off, thankfully. But we had to kind of point out, ooh, a male nurse, how different. But what happened is, as more men joined the career, the field itself became better respected with better pay. I still would argue nurses are probably underpaid. That is a really tough job. I don't want to do it. They could probably be paid more. That's a tough one. but they started to be at least respected a little more. On the flip side, if you are in a male-dominated field and women start entering it, they are usually viewed as a threat and are faced with a lot of sexual harassment. Now, that is in no way to say that men never face sexual harassment. No, sadly, they are also subjected to it quite a lot. But numbers wise, it's usually geared more towards women. So for a moment, I'm going to talk about my own research because it ties in. I mentioned that when I did my master's research, I looked at female truck drivers because truck driving in our country is a very male dominated career. Most of the truck drivers you see over the road are men. It's gone up. It used to be 6% of American truck drivers are women. It's now up to 7.9. Realistically, I'm looking at that with 2020 and thinking, man, I should double check. It's probably gone up again. So I'll have to double check. What's interesting is where we see gendered segregation in truck driving is the different levels of truck driving. So you can do long haul driving, which is the people that are usually living in their truck, driving from like New York to California and back again. Or you can do short distance. Because in our society, women are still expected to be the primary caregivers for children, there's a tendency for women to join the short haul road rather than the long haul. My own aunt was a trucker for 15 years. She did short distance, and that is because she wanted a job with some independence. Yes, she had to work for a company, so she had a boss, somebody to tell her where to go, but which route she took and where she stopped for lunch and things like that was all up to her, and she loved it. But she took short distance because my cousin was a little kid at the time and she wanted to be home. She wanted to be home to pick him up from school, cook him dinner, ask him how his day went, things like that. So she took the short distance route and she loved it. I loved it because at the age of 13, for take your daughter to work day, she didn't have a daughter, so she took me and I got to go with her all day on the road. It was the most fun a 13-year-old could have. I got to miss school and I got to hang out with my cool aunt over the road. She let me help, except for the one place she had to drop something off and she wouldn't let me get out of the truck. And her words were, "Your mother would kill me." She had to deliver something to the men's prison. And she was like, "No, in the truck." And I'm like, "Well, I want to go." And she's like, "Absolutely not. Your mother's going to kill me if I bring you into a prison." And I'm like, "Okay." So instead, she left me in the truck where I could see the guys just like hanging out in the yard. And I'm like, "Hi, I don't know, I'm just sitting here. How's your day? What are you doing?" But this career is appealing to a lot of people who want some freedom. You get to kind of be your own boss. And if you have enough money, you can actually buy your own truck and literally be your own boss. Looking at work and family, in American culture, 46% of Americans state that work has interfered with family rather than the other way around. Meaning, close to half, a little less than half of Americans have said, if I have, let's say, a romantic dinner planned with my wife, and it's for Friday night, and then my boss calls me and says, "Oh my God, we got this big project. I'm going to need you to work overtime on Friday." 46% of Americans would say, "Sorry, honey, I guess we got to postpone our dinner," versus the other way around. Now, realistically, yeah, that might mean that we're putting work above family. I also think that ties into our economy. We live in an economy where our health insurance is tied to our job. So job security is really important to us. So some of us might think like, yeah, my wife's going to be mad at me, but she's not going to divorce me over rescheduling one dinner, versus my boss might fire me and I don't want to risk that. But 40% of women and mothers are the primary source of income for families. There are barriers to full equality among the sexes. I mentioned the gendered pay gap. When we're literally not being paid equally, that's going to leave us with unequal access to resources. I think stereotypes also need to change. Sometimes a stereotype sounds good, but it's still harmful. So a stereotype that I have heard is that we're just naturally better at domestic chores, which sounds like a good thing. We're saying, hey, you're good at something. But usually what it ends up being is then the stereotype is, and men are just naturally bad at domestic chores. And in fact, I brought up an old movie from the 80s, Mr. Mom. That was the entire premise of that movie. The movie is a humorous look at, it starts off with he has a full-time job and she's a stay-at-home mom. He loses his job and she gets a full-time job. So they switch roles. And hilarity ensues because he's never cooked before, he doesn't know how to clean up after the kids, all that. And it is a funny movie, but it kind of perpetuates that idea of like, oh, bless his heart, he's doing his best. It's just that he's naturally not good at it. Bless you. And where that's a problem is weaponized incompetence, which is a newer term. Some men will say, well, I'm not going to do this domestic chore. I'm going to leave it for my wife or my girlfriend because she's just naturally better at it and I'm going to mess it up. An example of weaponized incompetence is doing the job badly so that you're never asked to do it again. And I'm going to tell a little bit of lore from my past, back when I used to date men. I was interested in a gentleman. I was in my late 20s and I was really into him. And we were hanging out with a whole bunch of people. And he was talking to his brother-in-law. So they were talking about his sister. And his brother-in-law was saying something about her wanting him to, I don't know, load the dishwasher or something like that. And he didn't want to do it. And this guy that I was interested in all sincerity said, oh, well, I know how to fix that for you, my guy. Just do it badly and she'll never make you do it again. And in that moment, my attraction just out the window. I was like, ooh, I'm like, you do that crap on purpose? Now, that's not to say every man that's bad at domestic chores is purposely bumbling it to make you do it. Some people may not know how to do it. For instance, talk about a dishwasher. I grew up without a dishwasher. I have never in my life owned a dishwasher. If you told me to load a dishwasher, I would do my best. I'd probably do a bad job. I've never done it before. That's not because of my gender. It's because I've just never done it before. And my reminder up there is no parent babysits their own kids. I hear that way too often where some parent will say, no, I gotta babysit my kids tonight. That's called being a parent. You babysit other people's kids. So on average, I can't drink water today, apparently. Women make, okay, so it's 81% of what their male peers make. So about 81 cents per the dollar. And it's even less for various different ethnic groups of women of color. Increasingly, America's poorest are women and their children. Kotak suggests a solution. He says women of the world should organize. And I'm pretty pro-union, so I think, yeah, that's a good idea. We should organize. We should maybe look for solidarity. You can look into, I believe it was Iceland a few decades ago, had a women's strike where all the women of Iceland didn't go to work, didn't do any domestic chores, just said, nope, we're on strike, we're done. And the men of Iceland very quickly were like, oh my God, they do a lot of work. Like the second they stopped doing it, they were very aware of it. Now, I think I left this slide up, did I? Good, okay. So here are my solutions that would help minimize the gendered pay gap and make it more equality. That was a terrible sentence, make it more equal. More equitable, I think is what I was trying to say. Now, these are all my opinions, so I'm not gonna quiz you on this slide. This is just what I think would help. One, raise the minimum wage to something actually livable. It is driving me bonkers that we're still talking about the fight for $15 an hour. That is like a decade-old fight. We are way past that now. $15 an hour is not enough to live on. Paid parental leave. We're one of the few countries in the Western world that doesn't have federally guaranteed paid parental leave. And I would argue, I specifically said parental and not maternity leave, because I would argue, regardless of your gender, if you just brought a little bundle of joy into your life via birth or adoption, I would want you to take some time to bond with them, regardless of your gender. I think that would be beneficial. And I say that as a child-free person. I'm okay with someone having a few weeks
Just
off.
heard of that recently. There's
Really?
A friend of mine, yeah, he works in the iron group.
Oh,
They gave him like 6 weeks.
hell yeah.
Maternity with his
Yeah.
wife.
Good, good. I like that.
Yeah. Like, oh,
Take it, enjoy it.
Yeah.
I know it's also work. That's why I said.
It's new.
Yeah, it's new. We're getting there. I think having sick days in addition to paid time off for a lot of people, so we still assume that moms are going to be the caregivers. So what happens is if your child is sick, somebody has to stay home with them. And it very frequently is the mom. And she ends up using all of her vacation time to take care of her kid without a vacation. So then, while one person is saying, well, I have 2 weeks, I'm gonna go to, I don't know, Mackinac Island. And she says, I don't have any time off because I used it all for my kid when they were sick. Affordable childcare. Holy cow, childcare is expensive in this country. Oh my gosh, so my best friend, when they had their two youngest, they were both under 5. And she was working at a bank full-time. Now, thankfully, she hated her job. And that's thankful because she ended up quitting. She hated her job. And then they sat down, her and her husband, and did the paperwork and realized what she was getting paid at the bank. They were basically turning around and it was a wash to pay for childcare and daycare for 2 young kids. So thankfully for her, she hated that job and wanted to be a stay-at-home mom anyways. So they decided, if we're wasting the money anyways, why don't you just stay home with them? So she did until they were both in school, and now she has a different job outside of the bank that she actually enjoys. Okay. So the additional article is called The Egg and Sperm: How Science Has Constructed a Romance Based on Stereotypical Male-Female Roles. And I don't get heavy into this, just a couple slides. It's an older article from 1991 by Dr. Emily Martin through the University of Chicago Press. Basically, what Martin is talking about is how important language is, and that we need to be careful of the language we use when talking about our reproductive organs. Language around human egg and sperm production tends to skew more positive language for the sperm than the egg. And it will use negative language for eggs. For example, sperm is usually celebrated because it is continually produced, versus eggs are devalued as inferior because production is finished at birth. And so I hear that as a woman in her 40s, where I will hear from, thankfully, nobody close to me because I would not stand for that. But I hear from other people, like the media, saying things like, oh, your 40s, better have kids now. Your eggs are just disappearing. Personally, as someone that doesn't want kids, I'm like, yes, they could disappear faster, actually. I'm like, I'm never going to use them. They're not getting used. So for me, I'm like, it's no big deal. Eggs are usually seen as large and passive in our reproduction. And we usually use language like they're laying in wait for the sperm. They make it sound like the egg is a pretty princess waiting to be rescued. Sperm is seen as small and streamlined and active. The wording, as Martin says, stresses the fragility and dependency of the egg, even though the same text acknowledges elsewhere that sperm also live for only a few hours. So sperm gets heralded as, isn't it cool that they're continuously being produced? And it is kind of cool. But we don't talk about how they die after a few days. Like they don't last very long. That's why they have to be continually produced. But we make it seem only in the positive light. Even when language is switched up, it can still be very aggressive. Martin talks about some of these articles will say, instead of the egg laying in wait and the sperm coming to penetrate, they will use language like the egg harpoons the sperm and brings it closer, which is still pretty aggressive. Like, I don't know why we're making these reproductive cells be so aggressive. Does the sperm attack the egg, or maybe we just need to be cautious about using too much personhood when talking about clumps of cells? Now, in no way am I going to open up the door to debate where we all stand on abortion, but we need to be cautious in giving too much personhood to when we first fuse an egg and a sperm. Because I know I'm kind of towing the line because religiously you may have different beliefs, but scientifically only, it's a zygote. It's literally just two fused cells that are just starting the division. It's not immediately a baby. It takes a while before it even starts to resemble a human. Now the miracle of childbirth and child production is amazing. It blows my mind that we can just make more of ourselves. That's fascinating. But we need to be cautious about giving too much personhood. So before I continue on, I will say, I'm gonna be at time. When it comes to language for egg and sperm, I would love if we talked about it more as a union, like a partnership, where yes, the egg is active, yes, the sperm is active, and they find each other and form a union. That seems a little more, or a little less aggressive, I should say. So I mentioned that we're going to get into a couple of options of other genders outside of male and female or men and women. Your gender identity is a person's identification by self and others as male, female, or something else. It's 2026. You have probably heard the term transgender before, but to define it here, it is a gender identity that is socially constructed and individually performed by individuals whose gender identity contradicts their biological sex at birth and the gender identity assigned to them in infancy. So that is a very academic definition. To put it a bit more plainly and simplified, transgender refers to, I'll use myself as an example. Let's say when I was born, this part is true. When I was born, the doctor said, "Congratulations, it's a girl." And my parents said, "Hey, it's a girl. We shall raise her as a girl." And now I will give my parents credit because I didn't know what I was going to be. I didn't end up with like a pink or blue nursery. I had a yellow nursery because it was the 80s and they said, "That's pretty gender neutral." So if I were trans, then let's say my parents say it's a girl, the doctor says it's a girl, but as I grow up, I think, that does not seem right. And yeah, maybe I think, nah, I think I'm a boy. Or maybe I just say, I don't think I'm a boy or a girl. I don't think either of those work. Maybe I'm non-binary. For anthropologists, that would count as trans because you are saying, I disagree with what the doctors say. They said girl, I say not a girl. Now, the flip of that is cisgender. And I bring it up because it's a newer term. And unfortunately, I have heard some cisgender people say, calling me cis is a slur. It's not. It's not meant to be anything mean or derogatory. Cisgender is just an individual who identifies with the gender assigned to them at birth. So I refer to myself as cisgender because I was born. They said, it's a girl. And my parents said, it's a girl. And as I grew up, I said, yeah, you're right, it's a girl. So that's me, I'm cis. The reason why we created that term is I mentioned language being important. Very frequently, someone who was cis before the term existed would be using language that could be really mean towards trans people. So the language I was hearing is someone would say, oh, so-and-so is transgender. Oh, me? No, I'm not transgender. I'm normal. And the unfortunate reality is, if you say I'm normal, you're saying a trans person is abnormal. So academically and within the community, we were basically looking for, okay, what's a better word? And there really wasn't one, so we had to come up with one. Cisgender is not anything dismissive or derogatory or offensive. It's literally just saying you identify as the gender assigned to you at birth. In Western societies, we are seeing an increasing number of people identifying as non-binary, sometimes also called gender non-conforming. Oftentimes, these people prefer they, them pronouns, but it's not a guarantee. I have quite a few friends who are non-binary, and it is a mix. Some of them prefer they, them pronouns only. Others are good with literally any pronoun. Some will say only she, her, and they, them. It really depends on the individual. What I hear from some naysayers is that it's trendy to be trans or it's trendy to be non-binary because we're seeing more people identifying as such. But realistically, the reason why we're seeing more people identify with it is because previously they didn't know it was an option. If you think of it this way, historically, like literally only 40 years ago and before, many Americans thought that being left-handed was a sign of the devil. And so they would force little left-handed kids to become right-handed. And if you force them young enough, you can learn to use a different hand, and then you become right-handed. Once we finally had the discussion of, hey, left-handedness is totally normal, it doesn't mean the devil's gotcha, we should stop forcing kids to be right-handed. We saw an influx of left-handed people. And some naysayers literally said the same thing. They said, oh, it's just trendy to be left-handed now. It's not that it was trendy, it's that they weren't being punished. So realistically, it's not a perfect world for trans people today, but it's a lot better than it was. And so realistically, we have more younger and younger kids having that conversation and saying, I think I might be trans, or I think I might be non-binary. I think of just with sexuality, it warms my heart that we're being a bit less dramatic about sexuality. For instance, a friend of mine, her little girl who's 10, they were getting ready for a pride event, and her little girl just randomly goes, oh, I'm pansexual. Yeah. Okay, can we get hot dogs when we're there? And I'm like, I love that it wasn't a big like, Mom, I need to talk to you. It was just a casual like, oh, by the way, Mom, pretty sure I'm pan, but also I'm 10. So we'll revisit this later. And then just went about her day. And I'm like, I kind of love that you made it a comfortable enough topic that she wasn't like fearful to tell you. She was just like casual update about my life. Now, there are a few examples I bring up of third gender options. The Hijras of India are a fascinating group of women. I am going to send out an announcement after class because I realized that with my audio not working, I can't show you the really cool video. So what I did to get you some extra points is I made an assignment on Blackboard, not due until Saturday, where you're going to watch that video. I have it linked, and then you're going to answer a couple questions about them because they're a really interesting group of people. Most of them were biologically born male, but now identify as women. In the video, you'll hear a little difference in language. Many of these women will refer to themselves and say, I am a transgender. In our language, in our culture, we would say a transgender woman or a transgender man. So it's a little difference in language, but it's a different country, that's why. And historically, they have existed for thousands of years. Another example is two-spirit people among Native Americans, which I think I get into on the next slide. And there are a few instances of, this is kind of an outdated term, but it's virginal transvestites. So basically, what happens is you have a smaller society that is patriarchal, where land and inheritance is only passed from father to son. And then what happens if you don't have any boys? Who gets your stuff? You would think, I would think, you would make an exception and say, I guess I'll pick my eldest daughter and she can get it. But they still say, no, it has to be a man. So what the dad does is he basically picks one of his daughters, she agrees to it, and she becomes he. He starts dressing as a man, he goes by he, him pronouns, he takes a wife, and they have children. And you might ask yourself, biologically, how do two female women have a baby without science intervening? Another loophole. So the two females basically decide on a male within the community. He has to agree, they talk to him and say, will you father our children? He sleeps with the wife, impregnates her. Biologically, those are his kids, but culturally, he has no ties to them. Those are not his kids. Those are those two women's kids. And so they can pass on inheritance now. So it's kind of an interesting loophole. I think it's basically like a bunch of extra steps that I think there should be, to me, it seems like a simpler solution would be to just say, okay, let's not be so strict. I'll pass my stuff on to one of my daughters. Now, would we call them trans? They're not calling themselves trans, so I would say no. But realistically, if you say have 5 biological daughters and one of them is trans, and this happens and you say, I'm gonna need one of you to step up and become a man, I can guarantee the trans kid is gonna be the one to volunteer and be like, oh, I will do that. I will happily do that. So I think it's a good option for them, but it's an interesting little loophole. The term intersex refers to a person with biological conditions reflecting a discrepancy between external and internal genitals. The outdated term is hermaphrodite. You will still hear the term hermaphrodite when we're talking about plants and animals, but the people have basically said, hey, we don't love that term. Can you please call us intersex? And I say, sure. Like, okay. Now, a lot of times when we think intersex or hermaphrodite, we may think of a person being born with full genitals of both sexes, which has happened before, but it's pretty rare. Usually, what intersex people end up having is a discrepancy or a mismatch between their genitals and their chromosomes. And a lot of people have been intersex their entire lives and have no idea. Me personally, I have no idea. I could be, and I might not know. I've joked about not ever wanting to have kids, but realistically, because I don't want kids, I've never gone in to get tested to see if I can have kids, because I don't want to. Why would I spend that money? And what are they gonna be like? Yeah, it would be great to have kids. And I'd be like, too bad, I'm not doing it. You know what sucks? I'm too fat. They have a weight limit. Yeah, I looked into that when I was younger, because I was like, can I sell my eggs and get some money? And yeah, I was too fat. I was like, oh, rude. I know. Right? Because apparently we don't want fat kids. I don't know. I don't know.
So
I didn't look
my
more into it.
sister and her wife just got some movie
Yeah.
about that.
See, I love kids. I'm excited when other people who want to have kids get to have, I just don't want them. I'm kind of, okay, in no way am I saying kids are the same as dogs, But that's kind of where I'm at in my life. I'm the same with dogs. Of like, I like other people's dogs.
Kids,
Love
puppies,
Yeah.
puppies are.
Yeah, my best friend has 4 kids and 2 dogs. I love coming over there and being like, I'm gonna rile everybody up. And then I leave. I just come over with sugar and I'm like, I go crazy. Okay, I'm gone. I mentioned the phrase or the term two-spirit. This is an umbrella term, a newer term, that bridges Indigenous and Western understandings of gender and sexuality. So, pretty much all Native American tribes historically have had people outside of the gender binary of men and women. Within each tribe, they have their own term for those people. But kind of as a pan-Indigenous term, two-spirit was invented to be used by all Native Americans if they identify in this way. It's a little poetic. It's basically the concept of I walk within 2 worlds. I'm not just a woman or just a man. I'm kind of balancing between the feminine and the masculine. This is a closed term, so even if you are non-binary and you think that is a really cool term, but you're not an Indigenous North American, I would ask you to not use that word because it is specifically for Native Americans. A great example of a historical figure that may have identified as two-spirit, I hesitate to attach labels to a historical figure who's no longer here to say, yes, I identify as two-spirit, or no, I don't. So this is Wehwa. She lived from 1849 to 1896. She was a member of the Zuni tribe in New Mexico. She was born biologically male, but had always gravitated towards women's dress and women's activities. And for the most part, the Zuni people said, that's fine, and let her become who she felt like she was. And she kind of helped anthropologists and historians to figure out, hey, we may be the ones that are pretty limited in our understandings of gender. And here we have Native Americans that you have people outside of the binary doing just fine. Now, did she identify as two-spirit at the time? No, she just identified as a woman. If she was alive today, would she identify as two-spirit? Probably, but I can't say for sure. I'm gonna run out of time, but okay. I'll just finish up next week. So looking at, I brought up the term non-binary. What that means is somebody whose gender identity exists outside of the binary of just men and women. It's an umbrella term. For anthropologists, we would include non-binary people as trans, because right now, no baby being born in our country is being marked as non-binary. We're saying they're either male or female. So then technically, if you grow up to say, no, I'm non-binary, that for anthropologists would count as trans because it's different than what you were assigned. But I bring that up to say, it's going to depend on the person. I have quite a few friends who are non-binary. Some of them consider themselves trans. Others say, no, that term's not for me. So it really depends on the person. Oftentimes, they will prefer the they, them pronouns, but you can have a variety. What confuses a lot of people is neo-pronouns, so which are basically made-up pronouns, which technically all pronouns are made up, but they're new made-up pronouns. So like one I have heard is Z-zer. So it's Z-E and Z-E-R instead of like she, her, or he, him. Now, I will admit, as an old lady, sometimes that's hard for me because that's not a pronoun that I use very frequently. So it's harder for me. The they, them has actually been pretty easy for me. I still make mistakes, but it's been an okay adjustment. Now, when we use the acronym LGBTQ+, it is a long acronym, but It could be even longer. That's why we have the plus signs, so that we're inclusive. This acronym includes both sexual orientations as well as gender identities. So when we're looking at sexuality, that is who you are sexually attracted to. And really, we could say physically attracted to. Who are you looking at and saying, that's a nice looking person? The definition that Kotak gives is sexual attraction to persons of the opposite sex, same sex, or both sexes. I would say opposite sex still makes it sound like we're very strict with that binary. So I would say maybe a better solution would be to say same or different genders rather than opposite. Okay, I'm actually gonna stop there because otherwise I'll be stopping like halfway through a topic. So I'm gonna stop a whole 2 minutes early. I'll wrap this up next week. I'll send out an announcement about that other little assignment to get you some extra points. And that's it. Otherwise, have a great week. Drive safely. The sun is still out. I'm so excited. Okay. Uh-oh, I have chats that I wasn't paying attention to. Oh, good. Doctors get paid parental leave for 6. That's amazing.
Well, I missed that, last. It was an assignment where you had like